Brendan Blumer responds to the voter collusion allegations with a reminder that Block.One has not yet exercised its 100 million EOS voting power. He says, "We believe it is important to ensure a free and democratic election process within EOS, and may, as we deem appropriate, vote with other holders to reinforce the integrity of this process." Welcome to EOS Weekly, your #1 source of EOS news. Today is Thursday, October 4th, and the title of this week's episode is A Look at Huobi and Whale Voting. So let's get into this week's update, starting with headlines. In last week's episode, we covered the allegations of vote buying and general collusion in BP elections, centered mainly around Huobi and the Chinese BP community. This tweet from Maple Leaf Capital is what triggered a flurry of responses that we'll go through now. But first, the root source of Maple Leaf Capital's tweet was this post by EOSONE, which came out on September 26th. This post provides alleged evidence of coordinated vote trading and vote buying led by Huobi, which is a block producer but is also the second biggest crypto exchange in the world. This drew attention from all the EOS critics and gave them fuel for their argument that DPoS, Delegated Proof of Stake, which is the consensus algorithm used by EOS, is inherently flawed. On September 30th, Kevin Wilcox was going to run an alliance workgroup on the Constitution with a primarily Chinese group, but repurposed the call to discuss the collusion accusation instead. Kevin tried to get a consensus on whether this group believed the allegations were true, but didn't get a concrete answer. Most of them didn't seem to know whether it was true or not. And their general stance was that we should be forward-thinking and focus on increasing voter participation so that these types of issues become negligible going forward. Thomas Cox put out a formal statement from the alliance that same day. The useful part of this statement was that he spelled out how the process would work if we as the community wanted to take action. It would start with someone from the community filing a claim with ECAF against the vote buyers and vote sellers. Arbitrators would then work through the facts and evidence to arrive at a ruling, which could then potentially lead to an order sent to the block producers. The next day, October 1st, Brendan Blumer put out a formal statement on behalf of Block.One. The quote at the opening of this video was from this statement. What Brendan is doing here is reminding the BPs and the community that Block.One has 10% of all tokens and that they have not yet exercised their voting rights with those tokens. If Block.One were to vote under the current system, they would basically be picking the top 30 viable BPs, and the rest of the community's vote would merely be causing those BPs to shift up and down within those 30. But it would be extremely difficult for a BP to get into the top 30 without making Block.One's voting list. So hopefully it won't come to this. That same day, October 1st, was the day that Huobi sent out its first formal statement in response to the allegations. It was a short statement, only a few paragraphs, and in it said, "Based on the initial investigation, there were no financial contracts involved between Huobi and any third party. The investigation is still ongoing, and therefore, we seek your patience and cooperation in this matter." EOS New York weighed in on this with a tweet saying that vote buying is impossible to enforce, and that the better solution is to set up incentives the right way so that this becomes a non-issue. They mention how things like Rex and Chintai could help. And what they mean here is that these token leasing systems, if set up correctly, will incentivize more token holders to get out and vote. And the greater the voter participation, the less influence entities like Huobi will have. So this is a good segue into a question that we wanted to address, which is, how much influence does Huobi have at the moment? If something like this was indeed happening, where let's say the allegations turned out to be true, how much influence would Huobi's voting power have over the BP elections? Let's try to answer this by starting here at CoinMarketCap, at the exchange listings. So on CoinMarketCap, you can see how big each of the exchanges are based on their trading volume. And as you can see here, Huobi is currently the second largest exchange in the world. And any EOS stored on the Huobi exchange can be used by Huobi to vote for BPs. Now, the way Huobi utilizes this voting power appears to primarily be through these voting proxies. For anyone unfamiliar with proxies, if you are an EOS holder who doesn't know enough about the BPs to make an educated vote, you can select a proxy to vote on your behalf. And then what happens is all of your voting power gets channeled through that proxy. Huobi has a large set of proxies set up, with the voting power of each of those proxies anywhere from 1 million to 5 million EOS tokens. The EOS Aloha site, which is what we're showing right here, provides current data on all the voting proxies, and this is sorted by the largest ones to the smallest. The proxies highlighted in yellow here are all Huobi proxies. Some actually have Huobi in the account name, but we found others by looking at the accounts underneath the proxy account that is providing the millions of EOS in voting power to these Huobi accounts. Basically, it's pretty easy to identify the Huobi accounts because most of those accounts were created by either this HAYTQN account or by the EOS Huobi Fund account. If you add up all the EOS voting power controlled by these Huobi proxies, it comes to 28 million EOS worth of voting power, which is a substantial amount. But the next question, knowing that Huobi is voting with 28 million EOS, is how much is that 28 million when compared to some of the other whales out there? This will help us put this into context as to how much influence Huobi has in the ecosystem when compared to the other big voters. At Blocks.io, you can see a pie chart of the top 100 EOS holders, the whales. Of course, we see Block.One up there with about 10% of all EOS tokens. And to the right of Block.One, and circling down, you see the next biggest whale at 5.2%, and the next one down at 4.5%, and so on. To the left of Block.One, you can see that all the other accounts outside of the top 100 only account for 31% of the token holdings. So these top 100 whales have 69% of the voting power and are basically getting to pick who is block producer and who isn't, assuming they are exercising their voting power, right? Here's the same data from that pie chart, but shown in a list format. And as we mentioned earlier, Block.One has not yet exercised their voting rights. This is pretty much common knowledge among people who follow EOS closely. But what people may be surprised to find out is that Block.One is not alone as a whale who doesn't vote. This part was a bit surprising when we found this, but of the top 12, none of these top 12 whales have voted yet. These are accounts ranging in size from 14 to 52 million EOS tokens, and of course Block.One up there with 100 million EOS tokens. So that's a lot of unused voting power. You have to go all the way down to lucky number 13 to find one of these mega whales that actually do vote. Number 13 has 13.5 million EOS that they are voting with. So going back to the voting power of Huobi with their 28 million. So being that none of the other top 12 whales are voting, and the biggest whale that is voting with 13.5 million EOS, that means that Huobi's 28 million voting power is quite influential. Keep in mind that the reason why this 28 million didn't show up in our list of whales on the previous slides was because the 28 million is divided into smaller accounts of 1 to 5 million in size that are then used for those voting proxies. But going back to this list, another surprising thing is that number 14, with 12 million EOS, is a Huobi account. We know that because of the creator of the account is that same HAYTQN account, which created several Huobi accounts. But as you can see here, Huobi, this largest Huobi account is not exercising its right to vote. So this is the biggest of all the Huobi accounts. And looking at the account activity, it appears to be one from which they do a lot of business, transacting with other exchanges. So it is strange that Huobi is letting all of this voting power go unused. But looking at other exchanges, we found a very similar pattern. Bitfinex, which is number 7 in the exchange rankings. And going back to EOS Aloha's proxy data, we see that a lot of the Bitfinex proxies are set up similar to Huobi, where they have many proxies with about 3 million EOS tokens in each. And now, knowing that Huobi's influence totaled up to 28 million EOS tokens, Bitfinex had more. When we added up all of the Bitfinex proxies, it totaled 40 million EOS tokens. So, going back to the whale list on Blocks.io, we find that Bitfinex has this account here at number 5 with 36.8 million EOS tokens in it. But again, similar to Huobi, Bitfinex has not yet voted with this account. So like Huobi, Bitfinex keeps smaller accounts of 3 million each that they use for voting, but do not vote with this master account. Bitfinex uses this large account of 36 million to do business with other exchanges, such as Huobi or Binance. And speaking of Binance, Binance is #1 in the exchange list as the largest exchange by trading volume. And they also made our list of the biggest whales in EOS, but they're down here at number 12. So a similar pattern here again, as with the other exchange accounts, where they have a lot of other smaller accounts that feed into this one big master account. But with Binance, this account does not appear to interact with the other exchanges that we've seen so far. Like the other whale accounts up here, there's no voting being used from this 13.9 million EOS-sized account from Binance. Same thing again with this exchange, BitThumb, which is number 6 here in the exchange size. They have an account here, which is they're the number 2 account after Block.One, BitThumb is. But again, they do not vote. Same thing again with OKEX, the number 3 exchange in size on CoinMarketCap. That corresponds to the number 4 account on the EOS whale list. But again, they do not vote with this account. So going back to our original question of how big a deal would it be if the allegations were true regarding Huobi being involved in voting collusion, here's the answer. Being that none of the other whale accounts are voting at the moment, 28 million tokens worth of sway is pretty impactful. Huobi appears to be second only to Bitfinex in terms of the amount of influence they have over BP elections. Now, as EOS New York brought up in their tweet, the next event that is going to make this more interesting is Rex. Rex will encourage more people across the board to vote, because you can't participate in earning the Rex dividend if you don't vote for at least 21 BPs. So we definitely expect to see the common man here in the 31% group increase their voting turnout. But will the mega whales over here, who are not currently voting, also want to take advantage of the Rex dividend? Because if they do, that has the potential to offset any gain in voting participation by the common token holder. Also keep in mind that among those whales who are not yet voting are Huobi and Bitfinex. They are not voting with their biggest accounts yet. If they were to start voting with those accounts, Huobi would go from 28 million to 40 million EOS tokens that they could vote with. And Bitfinex would go from 40 to 76 million. But again, going back to our original question of how big a deal is voter collusion at the Huobi scale, here's one more thing to factor in. The reason why exchanges have a tremendous amount of influence in the first place is because right now, the majority of EOS token holders are investors. In this pie chart, the thin red piece of the pie here represents token holders who own EOS because they're using it to run a dApp. Right now, these dApp teams represent a very small minority, which is reflected here by the red. You can see the same thing if we go back here in that some of the biggest whales are exchanges. Anyone holding EOS for the purpose of dApp development has it in a real EOS account, not an exchange. And most, if not all of those dApps are part of the 31% piece. The people holding on an exchange are the investors. And back to this pie chart represented by the dark blue. Now, if you watch here, here's what's going to happen over the next several years. dApps will be built on EOS, and the red part of the pie will grow. Investors who are holding EOS to make a buck will sell out when the price is right. And the investor's slice of the pie, the dark blue, will shrink as the dApp slice grows. dApps will buy and hold for the long run because they need those EOS tokens to run their dApp. And as this happens, the influence that the exchanges have over BP elections will shrink and shrink until the dApps become the predominant voting force. And this is a good thing because the dApps truly care about the health of the EOS platform. They are reliant on it to run their business. So back to the present day, yes, we have some undue influence that these big exchanges have over our BP selection, but this is temporary. And keep in mind that these exchanges do want EOS to remain healthy. If the network performance starts to degrade because of incompetent BPs getting into the top 21, it will impact the operations of these exchanges and they will help correct course. They have too much money on the line, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the success of EOS to allow the system to degrade in any way. As far as we know, so far nobody has initiated the ECAF process that Thomas Cox spelled out here. We'll continue to watch this story closely and report on it in future episodes. So let's move on to Speed Round, where we take you through, in chronological order, all the EOS news, announcements, and events, starting with last week and going several months into the future. So, starting with Pixelmaster. On September 25th, somebody launched the EOS Pixels app at pixelmaster.io. This was the app created by EOS Asia, but they didn't launch it due to legal concerns. But EOS Asia did open source the software, which someone brought live. A brand new Pixel starts at 0.05 EOS, but subsequent purchases of that same Pixel cost 1.35 times the previous price. Pixel purchasers who get their Pixel overridden get their money back and they share in the profit. This app got a lot of traction, and as of today, the most expensive Pixel, the center Pixel, is currently going for 4,484 EOS, or more than 25,000 US dollars for a single Pixel. On September 27th, Brendan Blumer was on Bloomberg News to discuss how Block.One is spending the $4 billion raised during the EOS ICO. They covered the $1 billion VC fund, and Brendan said that later this year, or early next year, we'd be getting an announcement as to the project Block.One has been working on, which he said is a platform that will disrupt some of the large, centralized technology platforms today. And he went on to say that when they make this announcement, it will be clear why Peter Thiel and Jihan Wu were the investors that Block.One chose to partner with. This is likely the announcement that we were expecting to come during the London week, which was delayed for some reason, but we can't say for sure if this is the same thing or not. On September 28th, Telos had their first go, no-go vote to launch the Telos network. The Telos launch group contributors unanimously voted to not go live. It was a no-go. The video of their conference call is available on YouTube, where they reviewed the launch checklist, voted, and made the call to delay the launch for the time being. Their next potential date is in about 2 weeks on October 17th. Chintai went live October 2nd. Congratulations to the block producer EOS42, which was the block producer behind this project. Chintai is a token leasing app that enables token holders to earn tokens by leasing their share of the CPU and net bandwidth. The launch had been delayed several weeks due to the RAM issue and also to put Chintai through some security audits. Those audits passed, and Chintai is now available for use. EOS Rise is a dApp development workshop being held in Denver on October 10th and 11th. This workshop series is sponsored by EOS Tribe and OCI Partner. EOS Dublin is coming all the way from Ireland to host a meetup in Portland on October 11th, and where else than at an Irish pub. Along with EOS Dublin, Cypherglass and Thomas Cox will be giving presentations there. And as we mentioned earlier, Telos has their next go, no-go call on October 17th. What you see here is a current snapshot of their launch checklist. And as you can see here, about half are complete, and the other half are in progress or are currently being tested. So Telos is targeting to get all of these green before going live. Bitfinex is targeting a launch of EOS Finex on November 1st. Bitfinex gave a demo of this at the Blockchain Live conference last week. EOS Finex is a high-performance decentralized exchange built on EOS.io software. Bitfinex is planning to launch EOS Finex on a private sister chain, similar to how Ono is operating. Another big launch targeted for that same November 1st date is Worbly. Worbly is a sister chain of the EOS mainnet, a friendly fork geared specifically for the financial industry. And then we have the November 10th and 11th hackathon in San Francisco, and the EOS Block Producer Summit on November 16th and 17th in Norway. And this last week, Block.One announced the location of the grand finale of their hackathon series on December 7th. And that location is Cape Town, South Africa. All the past hackathon winners are being flown in for this event, so there's going to be a lot of talent at this. And then on January 21st through the 25th is the EOS DevCon in Tampa, Florida, which is a dApp and EOS developer-focused event. And that brings us to our featured EOS project of the week. Uber and Lyft provide a great service that many of us enjoy. But while using one of these services may feel like a peer-to-peer exchange between driver and rider, in actuality, you've got a middleman there facilitating the transaction and taking a decent-sized cut of it as well. This infographic here, created by the rideshare guy, shows how much of a cut companies like Uber and Lyft take from each transaction. Uber and Lyft are referred to as TNCs, transportation network companies. While many of us think of an Uber ride as a peer-to-peer exchange, it's actually far from it, as you can see from some of these numbers. While they advertise as taking 25% of every transaction, due to the way they account for booking fees, the Uber take can actually be as high as 42.75% of the fare for a ride in San Francisco, and you can see here the commission in other US cities. You've probably seen the headlines about how much money drivers make versus how much of that wealth flows to the corporate headquarters. Middleman companies make their money by providing the marketplace, the technology that matches up buyers with sellers or matches up people who offer a service with those who need the service. Now, this is a valid business model, and a huge number of companies out there today are middleman companies of various flavors. But what ends up happening with middleman companies is you get this flow of wealth from local areas where the service is rendered to the centralized place where the middleman resides. Blockchain is bringing us the best of both worlds, where we still get the virtual marketplace that helps match up people offering services like a car ride with people who need that service. But with blockchain, you can use tokenomics to enable true peer-to-peer exchange, eliminating the middleman. And that is exactly what Eva Coop is doing with their ride-sharing app. Eva Coop offers the same service as the other ride-sharing apps, but by building this on top of EOS, they are able to operate on much smaller margins than their competitors. Eva only takes 1% of each ride transaction to cover operating costs, and 4% goes to the ecosystem treasury. So the vast majority is kept by the driver. And what's more, as the Eva team explained at the Blockchain Live conference last week, the rider who is using the Eva app never has to even know that this is powered by blockchain. They can pay through the app with their normal fiat money, and they won't even know that tokens, exchanged on the EOS blockchain, were actually powering the underlying transaction. The driver does get paid in tokens, but he or she can easily convert those tokens to fiat at the end of the week to pay their bills. Eva Coop is driven by idealistic principles. In their white paper, they refer to eliminating the third party, the middleman, and they use the words local and localization a lot, where their goal is to keep the wealth and control within the local community, instead of it all flowing away to some central authority. The first lucky cities to see Eva roll out are Canadian cities like Quebec. Eva is a great example of putting the EOS blockchain to use in a way that impacts the lives of everyday people in a positive way, without them even having to know that they're using blockchain. Not only is Eva Coop an exciting project with lots of potential, but it can also serve as a great example if you're ever trying to explain the benefits of blockchain to a newcomer who hasn't quite grasped the concept yet. And this could be one of the first mainstream apps to get mass adoption and bring positive attention to the potential of EOS. We wish Eva Coop the best of luck with their launch. Congratulations to Eva Coop and for being featured this week's EOS Project of the Week. If you would like to nominate a great EOS project to be recognized here, please ping us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EOSWeekly. That's it for this week's episode of EOS Weekly. Please like and subscribe if you found this content informative and you want to continue to stay current on EOS as this revolution unfolds. Thanks, and we'll see you next week, right here on EOS Weekly.